Hey guys, welcome to the first ever episode of the Performance Theory YouTube channel. This has been something that I've really wanted to do for a long time, but with all the travel and international races that I've been doing with the teams over the past few years, it's really been hard being home enough and preparing the content and being consistent with this. So it's not like I want to start something and then just after a few weeks fade away. But now with this whole COVID-19 situation around the world, all of our events have been cancelled. We were supposed to be in Japan this week, but obviously all of the races for the foreseeable future are cancelled. And the government also announced now that we're going to be in lockdown for 3 weeks. So I actually thought that this was the perfect time to start something like this. The thing that I was struggling with is I just didn't really know where to start because there's so much content that I really want to put out there for people to use. Obviously, it needs to be structured and everything, but to find a starting point for it was really hard. So what I thought was the perfect place to start is actually just to state why I'm doing this and then get into the first video that I want to put out there. So I grew up in quite a rural area of South Africa where the coaching scene was really dead. Like this was also the time before YouTube really took off and all the online platforms took off. So I was swimming in high school and we actually basically had to order DVDs from the United States if we wanted any good coaching content or wanted to know what the top people in the industry are doing. And obviously if I lived closer to the universities in the main cities, it would have been a different story because that type of setup was available there. But for where I lived, it really wasn't possible. And where I've been over the past few years with the team and the teams that I've worked for is that we've been in really all over the world with the races at the moment, and we've seen that cycling is not only just a European-based sport anymore. Like there's so many other countries in the world that has adopted cycling where there are development programs and guys, starting young and aspiring to be professionals. So I think there might be a lot of people who are where I was a few years back. Luckily, there's some really good online channels and content online that people can use. And also in the years that I was working at Team Dimension Data, obviously we had African riders on the team, but frequently on our Facebook DMs and stuff, we'd get messages from people also from Eritrea and Rwanda and those places where they would ask us for like training advice, sample programs and stuff. And to the best of our abilities, we tried to help these guys. But we found there's kind of like two problems. Like it can't really be individualized for everyone. We don't really know who we're working with. And I believe that a very big part of an efficient training program is actually understanding the training and not just putting like a generic program out there. Even though it could be efficient, the best compliance and the best efficiency, if I can say it like that, of an exercise program is when guys really understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and also have a level of understanding where they can adapt when it needs be, like with weather and injuries and all of that type of stuff, where guys really know, okay, cool, these are the principles we follow, this is why the program is structured like that, and if X, Y, and Z happens, we can make these changes. So it's very hard to just put out a program, have everyone follow it kind of like indefinitely and achieve success. So that's one of the main reasons why I decided to start this YouTube channel. The other one is I don't think I'm going to be in cycling coaching for that much longer. Like there's a lot of other things that I want to go to in the sporting world and other opportunities that open up, but I've committed to some guys until the 2024 Olympic Games. Quite a cool bunch of young guys that I'm working with at the moment, and I would like to see that through and just providing value for people. Like I think there are really good information channels out there, other channels and platforms where guys can get information, and for me it's just to add to that. And maybe I think everyone kind of like has a recipe according to what they coach, and maybe the stuff that I share could work a bit better for people in certain circumstances, like people with full-time jobs or people in that also grow up in rural areas and places where not all the training facilities are readily available. And I really want people to achieve their goals out there. Like I think I see a lot of people, really working hard with their training and stuff, and it's really kind of like debilitating in a way if you put in the hours and you put in the effort and you don't reach your goal. So maybe people can engage with my content, find some of the things that might be keeping them back, and then overcome that in the years to come. And I really also, like I said, I think it's important for people to understand their training, even people who are coached. A lot of people put out quite generic programs out there, or you maybe download programs, buy them off the internet. But I think to understand why they're structured like that, I'm not saying it's bad programs, don't get me wrong, but just increasing the level of understanding with those programs even you might get to those days where like you're not really understand what the use of this session is. Maybe some of the content that I'm sharing could help you guys understand your training better. So where I want to start with this, kind of like the basic, let's call it the model of adaptation, like how the body adapts to training really. I think that's the foundational place to start. Like I don't want to get into specific workouts and why this is good and why that is maybe not good. I don't want to start there. I just want to start at finding a place where we can get a model which to build our training around. Let's call it a model of adaptation. And that's one thing when you start looking at training or analyzing training. Like if you had to take a whole body, like the whole human organism as a whole, and you have to start analyzing that on a training level, there's so many systems at play. It's almost impossible to really make accurate assumptions or predictions at that level, especially if you're new to the sport and thinking, okay, X, Y, and Z is working, or we're measuring, these things. So the best is that I found is to break it down into the smallest possible units. And that's also what we were taught in first year university. I'll never forget the lecture. I think it was like in the first 2 weeks of exercise science in the first year, where we had this lecture similar to what I'm going to share with you today. Is like taking the human organism and breaking it down to its most foundational part in order to find like one central focus point where we can start modeling adaptation from. So if you look at the human organism, built of a lot of systems, organ systems, and a lot of, let's say, like the nervous system, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, all of those are affected by training and have certain things that how it responds to training. And if we're going to start looking at that big picture, it might leave us confused and it might be like more like a seminar type of talk. But what I want to do is break it down to the smallest unit. So basically, if you look at all these systems in the human body, all these organ systems, you break it down to the individual organs, the tissues, and ultimately, if you go down the hierarchy of complexity, you ultimately end up at the human cell. Like all of these organ systems are built up of cells, and that is the smallest unit in the body that can sustain life in itself, and that is the perfect place to start, like a common denominator in all of these systems. So what I want to look at today is how cells adapt. Because I don't know if you guys have seen, but a lot of times in gyms, they've got this general, super compensation curve of how the body adapts to training and stuff. Whereas you do a hard workout, your functional capacity is maybe lowered for a day or so. And then after 48 hours, your body builds up stronger. And that's kind of like how you should train and rest. Like I remember that quite distinctly from the gym where I grew up and trained. And that's how they explained it. And at the point, it made sense. Scientifically, I think there's more to it than just that, because I have guys who would do seriously hard cycling tours and then reach their PBs on day 3. Like that doesn't really apply. So now we're at the cell, and what I want you guys to understand about a human cell is all human cells have one goal in common, and that is to sustain survival and perform its innate functions. There's different cells like blood cells, nervous cells, or nervous system cells, muscle cells, all of those types of cells. They have their respective functions, but they all adapt in a similar fashion. This was addressed quite well by Dr. Hans Cellier, who was a Canadian endocrinologist in the year 1936, when he proposed the general adaptation syndrome, is what he called it. It's a 3-phase process of how he explained cells adapt to stress. And I think that this is a much better way of looking at adaptation within the cell, and a good place to start with explaining this. So I don't know who of you guys might have had biology in high school, or maybe you've just watched a lot of Big Bang Theory. I know it comes up a few times there, but cells always try and stay in its in a state of homeostasis, what it's called. So that's like a relatively stable internal environment in the cell where it can optimally survive and perform its functions. Like there's no stress within the cell. It's in a really relaxed state and it can just perform its function. Like that's the state which all cells try and maintain themselves at. But now you have things in the body that places stress on cells. It could be like anything from toxicity, emotions, exercise. All of those are forms of stressors on the human body, and they disrupt the homeostasis within the cell. So the cell is not in an optimal environment in order to perform its functions and to survive. Like severe stresses can be a threat to the survival of a cell. So ultimately what all cells want to do is get back to that state of homeostasis when a stress is imposed on the cell. And exercise is a perfect example of a stress on a cell. So I'm just going to take like a rough example. So let's say you're on a long ride, maybe like a 4, 5, 6 hour ride, whatever your level is. I want you to think of it at a cellular level with regards to energy. Let's take energy as the example. So over the course of the ride, the energy within the cell is becoming depleted. And at a point, it has to start relying on external structures like the breakdown of fat in order to provide energy for the cell in order to maintain survival, the number one goal of each cell. Now, let's say you're going on a ride that you're quite used to. Let's say you're quite used to doing 2-3 hour rides with your friends on the weekends, but you've done this a couple of times. So the level of stress on the body is not necessarily that much because the body has adapted to that level. So the general adaptation syndrome basically is in 3 phases: the acute phase, the resistance phase, and the exhaustion phase. So the acute phase is basically where a stressor is imposed on a cell. It's not that severe or it's not that prolonged yet, so the cell can quite easily adapt to the stressor, resist it, maintain a relatively stable environment in itself within range, and once the stressor is removed, it can quite rapidly regain a state of homeostasis. So the next phase is if that stressor prolongs for a certain period of time, maybe the cell becomes depleted of energy and it has to rely on external sources. So the ride keeps going on, you maybe push a bit more than you used to in the past, maybe like 5-8%, just as an arbitrary figure, more than you used to in the past. Then the cell realizes, okay, well, that's a significant or more significant amount of stress. I will need to upregulate in certain systems in order to match a stress like that or even a more severe stress in the future. And that is kind of like where we want to be. That is the goal of where we want to get at in our training. Very important though, what he really distinctly says in his theory is that there needs to be intermittent periods of rest in order for that to take place. Like the cell can't be under stress and adapt while it's under stress. There needs to be these intermittent periods of rest in order for the cell to get back to a state of homeostasis, to get stronger and able to resist more stress. Now the third phase is the exhaustion phase. That is if the stressor keeps persisting over a longer period of time. Then you start facing a problem because the cell reaches a state where it's so exhausted that it can't efficiently get back to a state of homeostasis. It maybe takes a lot longer, but us as athletes train on a continuous basis. So maybe the functional ability of the cell can't recover or even get better because it's just under stress the whole time, and gradually you just see the organism losing functional capacity. It can't recover and rebuild itself and get back to that state of homeostasis quick enough, and that's a dangerous place to be at. That's where we do not want to be. So that's why we want to really stress the cell hard and make sure there's intermittent periods of recovery. So one of my philosophies in coaching is goal-based coaching. Like, I know which days are loading days. I know I want to stress the body above the adaptation threshold, because if you have to think of this, there is some threshold of adaptation. If you're going to remain in the acute phase, like workouts that you're used to, there's not going to be a reason for the cell to really adapt, because it can recover and maintain homeostasis, or like get back to homeostasis really quickly. But if you think about it, you want to kind of like keep pushing marginally over a long period of time with intermittent rest periods, staying within the resistance phase. You never want to get back into the exhaustion phase, or like never even want to get into the exhaustion phase. And there's a few things around that I just want to mention. Like, I've heard a lot of people speak to juniors, and I love listening. Like, that's just one of the things that I do the most is whenever I'm in the environment, just listen to what people are saying. And something that really gets to me is when coaches and parents and people that might have been in the sport years back, with all due respect to them, come to young guys or guys who are new to the sport, or even adults who are very early on their fitness journey, and they will talk about their racing days, when they were even in Belgium or someplace like that, and how hard they used to train, and they've done 200 k's a day and rode to races and rode back. And then they'd say that kids and people these days have gotten soft and everything's now technological and all of that. That really pisses me off. I'm sorry. But to go and say that to juniors and people that are still new to the sport or still in the development phase of it, that's some of the worst advice that you can give to people, because you kind of like fast tracking them to the exhaustion phase if you set that expectation on them. Then what normally happens after a few months is the kids don't enjoy riding their bikes, or the juniors get to a point where it feels like a job to them already, and that's not where you want to be at. You just want to have them maintain a level of consistency and keep building. Like in every training block, maybe try and increase, like I say, 3 to 8%, maybe as an arbitrary number, take a rest period or a deloading week or phase, whatever that might be, and then build up from there. Like the consistency is the thing that you're looking at. Another thing that I can address is like, you know, all these memes out there where people say, let me think of one, train insane or remain the same. I mean, that's stupid advice. I'm sorry, but for someone that's really early into their journey, their fitness or athletic journey, that's really bad advice. Like I would say, maintain consistency. See, try to get something that you can sustain over a long period of time. Mark your rest period so that you have this intermittent rest for your body and your cells to recover and build up gradually over time. Now, the problem with that is that doesn't rhyme, so people don't think it's true. But just because something doesn't rhyme doesn't mean that it's true. So this whole hormetic process that we're discussing here, the whole adaptation process, which is called the hormetic process, is there's something very distinct to it. It's biphasic. So what the research also says is that it's defined as low dose stimulation and high dose inhibition, which is basically just what I discussed. Like if you keep increasing in low doses, it stimulates adaptation. But if you just keep imposing these high doses, that's actually inhibition. Now, just also get me when I'm saying this, like with guys that have a firm foundation in the sport, like guys that have a long training history and been doing it for years, I'm not saying there's never a place for, doing quite massive, significant workouts. The thing is that you need to build up to that level. The problem that I have is you see a lot of times people maybe get selected for a new team or they set these new goals and suddenly they go on a training camp where it's just so much above to what they're used to, it's actually counterproductive to what they want to achieve. Like they feel like, wow, this was an insane training block, but the effect of it is not what they expect. It might be counterproductive. And that's what I want to address with this. Like keep making marginal increases until you get to a level where you can do these insane high TSS workouts and loading blocks. There's a guy, James Lawrence. If you have the time, please go and Google that interview of him. It's on impact theory. The guy's name is James Lawrence. He was the first guy ever to do 50 consecutive Ironmans on 50 days. And he also coaches ultra endurance athletes. And the way he explains it of building a foundation to me was quite profound. Like normally when you sit with a guy that come and they have these quick goals, like, oh, I want to do this in a year, I want to do this in 6 months. And he always has the guys step back to a mindset of, let's take some time, a few years maybe even, and build a foundation. And that is where we'll get our best performances from. And I'd want to say the same thing to cyclists, like be patient in this journey. I think it's very important to understand like what teams are looking for at this moment in time. I'm speaking about continental teams, pro-continental teams, and world tour teams. Like consistency is such a key thing. And that's one of the things that I really looked at when I was advising teams and still am advising teams on rider selection, is looking for people who are consistent throughout the whole season. So what I would do is I would take their 20-minute best at various points in the season, average that out, and that is a number that I would use. I just would not use one, let's say maybe like the peak 20-minute at their hardest race at some points in the season. Like I would average it out, draw up a revised power profile of their 5 best performances in the year at certain time periods, breaking up the year, and that's where you can see how consistent a rider is. A lot of times people have this thing of, you train very hard for a race and you have a huge dip down, train very hard for a race. I don't really like to follow that approach. Yes, I do want guys to peak for certain races, then go through a deloading phase. But as long as everything is structured, if you kind of like zoom out on that model, it's very consistent work done throughout the year. Yes, you can modulate the intensity, the volume, and all of that type of thing, but consistency to me is almost everything. And I know that end result in racing is what a lot of teams out there are looking for. And this model really helps you to understand how you can get to consistency, how you can avoid burnout in the exhaustion phase and all of that, and really hit your performances quite on point. The other thing is noticing the importance of rest days. Like I've spoken to so many people and they feel guilty on rest days. They kind of want to go through all these other activities like swimming and stretching and being so active on rest days, even though they're off the bike, they still want to remain so active. And I always tell guys, like, maybe spend 30 minutes on the roller or the turbo, do my stretching program that I drew up for them, and that's what you do in that day. The rest of the day, you're in bed, you're Netflixing or doing other stuff that you need to maybe go buy groceries or stuff like that. and just live like a normal human being for that day without feeling guilty. Maybe it's 2 consecutive rest days, getting through that and just getting your mind on, okay, cool, this is the body and the cells of the body returning to a state of homeostasis, and then we'll start loading again in a few days. I think for guys looking to do this long term, that is a very good and a healthy mindset and something to learn very early on. So what I want to do now is I just want to go on to Training Peaks and show you guys some models of loading that you can use, like taking this theoretical stuff that we've spoken of now and applying it to practical sense. Now I just want to give a kind of like a disclaimer here, because this is where a lot of people get scrutinized. They just post one model there, and then people try and apply it to a lot of people and say, oh, this can't work, this can't work. These are just patterns of loading. I've made a beginner, an intermediate, and an advanced, so 3 different levels of athlete. But you also have to understand, like, everyone has different circumstances. Like if they have an 8 to 5 job, if they're juniors and they have school, or maybe they're full-time pros, different models of loading are going to work for different people, and that's why it's really hard to have it's actually almost impossible to have a one size fits all. So try and see the principle in this and try and see if you can maybe apply it to your training, or maybe use it to understand the training that you're doing. So let's get on to Training Peaks and let me show you guys how I would structure the loading and the recovery for my athletes. Alright guys, so now that we've looked at the theory of the hormetic process, let's see how we can apply that to our practical training. So what I'm first going to do is go through a loading pattern that I would follow for a beginner level athlete, someone that's very early into their fitness journey, or somebody that might still be very young and that cannot handle higher levels of loading. So normally I like to start Mondays off with a rest day. This is really easy for guys who either have school or work 8 to 5 jobs, and try and have most of the recovery days fall in the week so that we can focus the loading on the weekends and then still do work on certain days within the weekdays. These would normally be shorter sessions. So let's say on the Monday we start off with a rest day, go to a low training stress, maybe a foundation work, let's say like an endurance type of ride on this day, still low training stress score, so we can kind of gain a bit of freshness in this area here. I want the guys to do my academy stretching and recovery program about twice a week, and then on the Wednesday and Thursday we might go to some moderate loading on the Wednesday and then specific interval loading on the Thursday. So this would mostly be tempo, sub-threshold work, maybe even aerobic threshold work if it's very early into the periodization of the season. And then I'd like the guys to take a rest day or like a really easy day on the Friday. So once again, maybe just like a half an hour on the rollers, do the academy stretching and recovery program, and then on the weekend we'll do some more specific loading. So let's say an endurance ride on the Saturday. It could be in the formats of a group ride or going out by yourself and just spending time in the zones, and then on the Sunday specific loading, which would normally be an interval session. I also like it on these days if guys go and do a group ride before and then afterwards go out and do their intervals. It'll pretty much stay the same for the second week. So these are the 2 weeks that we really want to focus on loading. Obviously, there's a lot of individualization that you can do here, depending on what level they are, how long the workout is, what the duration, frequency, intensity, all of that. You can individualize to a person, but I like to keep to this model of loading for guys who are fairly new. Then in the third week, what I want the guys to do is to have the Monday off, active recovery on the Tuesday. So this will once again be 30 minutes on the rollers or that type of workout, really low TSS. And then on the Wednesday, we'd once again do a low training stress foundation workout. So maybe just like a low to moderate endurance ride on Zwift or something like that. Go through the academy stretching and recovery program as per usual, and then from Thursday on, the loading pattern would look quite similar. But what we have here is a deloading block just to make sure that the body can recover before we enter the next phase of loading, which would be quite the same as what I've highlighted in the previous 2 weeks. So then if you look at an intermediate level athlete, maybe a guy that has been training for 3 to 5 years, or let's say rather 2 to 5 years, who's been really consistent in his training and who is able to handle a bit more loading than other beginner athletes might be able to. So once again, I want to keep the Mondays, the beginning of the week, really easy. A short session on the Tuesday, moderate intensity. So let's say
once again, tempo work or sub-threshold work, aerobic threshold work, specific efforts. Now, these could be one of two things. I would either focus on the thing that they're really strong at, like a race-winning effort, focus on their strengths, or focus on their lesser strengths, like stuff that might, you know, situations in a race or types of intervals that might get them dropped, like stuff that they're not really that good at. I don't really like to speak about weaknesses and stuff. I don't like athletes speaking to themselves about their training like that. So I always try to refer to lesser strengths. So this could be the focus or their race winning efforts. Thursday, I'd like to keep an easy day, and then we try and do 3 days of consecutive loading on a weekend. This is especially great for guys who do tour racing or maybe do multi day stage races, so that you have consecutive days of loading and then recovery blocks early in the week. So then after this loading phase on the weekend, so let's say this might be once again tempo or foundation level work, specific interval work maybe on the Saturday, could once again be after a group ride going and doing some specific intervals, and then on Sunday we'd have a volume loading day of endurance volume. Then on the Monday have a recovery day and a short moderate session on the Tuesday. So still, these are lot less TSS compared to what the weekend would be. So this acts as a form of deloading into the beginning of this week so we can attain a bit of freshness again, focus on the intervals on this day, and follow kind of like the same basic pattern. Then what we're going to do is basically the same. We're going to have a deloading block in the beginning of the week here. So a rest day, an active recovery day. So maybe again 30 minutes on the rollers and going through the academy stretching and recovery program. Still a light day on the Wednesday, on the Thursday as well, and then we start then again with a higher level of loading. So this is really quite a big block for the athlete to recover. You'll see these are two quite intense weeks of loading, 4 day deloading block, and then we continue the loading after that. Now we get to the real stuff for elites and full-time athletes, how I would load for them. So with these guys, generally these guys all engage in tour form racing. This loading phase might be a bit different if we're working towards something like a one-day race, let's say it be national championships or world championships, maybe even the Olympics. If it is for a one-day event, the loading would look different, but for most guys making careers in the sport, their job generally revolves around multi-day stage racing, and that's why I want to use this pattern for loading. So I would keep to 3 day blocks, have 2 3 day blocks in succession with one rest day between, whereafter I would have two recovery days or deloading days. So let's look at this. So on the first day, I would like to keep to the foundation work, maybe high endurance work, tempo work, have their specific intervals, maybe the stuff that they still not proficient at, or maybe their race winning efforts on this day, and then look at a bit of endurance loading on the Wednesday. Provide a recovery day for them, 30 minutes on the rollers, the stretching and recovery program, and then follow kind of like the same model of loading. Obviously, I'd mix these around, not keep it to the same efforts as the beginning of the week. So maybe on this day focusing on their lesser strengths, and this day focusing on their strengths. After this loading block here, I provide 2 recovery days because there would be quite a negative TSB by the if we gauge the intensity and the volume right. The TSB would be negative. We want to help the TSB recover a bit, and then from here we'd start the similar loading pattern for the next 2 3 day blocks. Have it another 2 day recovery block over there. Oh, sorry, typos, and then go through another 3 day block there. Then in the fourth week, we really want to focus on deloading because this is a huge block of loading that the guy has completed. I would like to give a complete off day on this day, the same type of active recovery rest day, active recovery day there, and then go to moderate load foundation work on this day. So this whole 3 day block here, I would like to keep it much easier in comparison to these over here, because in these last weeks we would really be focusing on high load. Here I would maybe make the tempo effort shorter, make the intervals less on this day, maybe increase the rest periods, have the overall ride be shorter, the same as with the endurance day over here. Like if the guy is normally doing 4 to 5 hours, I'd maybe keep this to 3 3.5 hours, so that we are sure that the TSB has recovered by the end of this week so that we can start the next 3 week loading phase.
So thank you guys very much for watching this episode. I really hope you guys could take something from it. If you have questions for me, or if you want to get into contact with me, the easiest thing to do is to go on the Performance Theory Instagram handle and drop me a message there. Maybe you want to ask me a question, elaborate on something that I said here, or maybe there's something that you want me to cover in a future video. So please, if you guys want to get into contact with me, I think that's going to be the easiest way. I don't know how all the like and subscribe stuff on YouTube really works. Do what you need to do, but I really hope that you guys could take something from this, maybe apply it to your training, and that it could help you guys reach your goals.